Trotzdem haben wir diese schwerste Zeit nicht nur überstanden, sondern es fertiggebracht.
Late 1944. The tide of war has turned. Allied armies threaten the borders of the Reich from both the east and the west, while its once proud capital, Berlin, lies in ruins under relentless enemy bombing. Its inhabitants, emaciated by food shortages and the hardships of war, have little to celebrate during the upcoming end-of-year festivities. The Berliners' trademark black humor had turned grim. The joke circulating around the city in those dark days was, "Be practical, give a coffin as a gift."
Alle 7 Sekunden stürzt ein deutscher Soldat. Stalingrad, Massengras.
The mood of the Germans had changed exactly 2 years earlier. Shortly before Christmas 1942, rumors began to spread that General Paulus's Sixth Army had been surrounded by the Red Army on the Volga. The Nazi regime found it difficult to admit that the largest formation of the entire Wehrmacht was doomed to be annihilated in the ruins of Stalingrad and the frozen steppes surrounding it. In order to prepare the country for the bad news, Joseph Goebbels, the Reich Minister for Public Enlightenment and Propaganda, had announced a German Christmas, which in National Socialist terms meant austerity and ideological determination to replace candles, garlands, and carols with Silent Night. By 1944, the traditional roast goose had become a memory of another time. Families scribbled messages on ruined buildings to warn their sons returning from the front that they were safe and had moved to another location. The air raids, carried out by the British at night and the Americans during the day, were so frequent that Berliners began to notice that they were spending more time in basements and underground shelters than in their own beds. Sleep deprivation contributed to a strange combination of repressed hysteria and fatalism. Fewer and fewer people seemed to care about being reported to the Gestapo for defeatism, as evidenced by the flood of jokes circulating at the time. It was said that the ubiquitous initials LSR, for Luftschutzraum or Air Raid Shelter, stood for Lerne schnell Russisch, learn Russian quickly. Berlin's largest air raid construction was the Zoo Tower, a huge reinforced concrete fortress with anti-aircraft batteries on the roof and huge shelters below, where crowds of Berliners huddled when the sirens sounded. The city was dominated by an atmosphere of impending collapse, both in people's personal lives and in terms of the nation's existence. Its inhabitants spent money without restraint, convinced that it would soon lose all its value. Water supplies were scarce when the bombing hit the supply network, and bathrooms quickly became disgusting places, which was a real affliction for a people so concerned with hygiene. It was also not uncommon for the authorities to seal toilets due to the high number of depressed people who, after locking the door, committed suicide inside. For a population of around 3 million, Berlin did not have enough shelters, so those that did exist were usually overcrowded. The 300,000 foreign workers in Berlin, identifiable by a letter painted on their clothes to indicate their country of origin, were simply forbidden from entering the bunkers and underground cellars. This measure was, in part, an extension of Nazi policy aimed at preventing them from mixing intimately with the German race. The other reason was the authorities' concern for saving the lives of those born in Germany. A forced laborer, particularly an Ostarbeiter or Eastern worker, most of whom came from Ukraine and Belarus, was considered replaceable. However, there were quite a few foreign workers, both forced and voluntary, who enjoyed a much greater degree of freedom than the unfortunate ones who had been confined to concentration camps. Moreover, their spirits rose considerably as the Red Army advanced, while those of their exploiters sank. Berliners felt an atavistic and visceral fear of the invading Slavs from the east. This terror easily turned to hatred.
Bei den erfolgreichen Gegenangriffen sind die deutschen Soldaten auf grausige Spuren bolschewistischen Mordterrors gestoßen. In Nemmersdorf und den anderen ostpreußischen Orten hat die den Sowjethorden von ihrer Führung gegebene volle Handlungsfreiheit gegenüber der Zivilbevölkerung bestialische Auswirkungen gefunden. Geschändete Frauen, erschlagene Greise, ermordete Kinder. Mit den entmenschten Horden des Bolschewismus kam über diese Ortschaft Raub, Brand und Tod. Diese Dokumente einer bestialischen Grausamkeit mögen eine letzte Warnung an Europa sein. Der Grad der Grausamkeit ist nicht zu benennen, der dazu gehört, ein unschuldiges Kind durch Kopfschüsse zu töten. Diese Kreuze sind das Fanal zu einem erbarmungslosen und erbitterten Widerstand. In den deutschen Soldaten hat Nemmersdorf einen fanatischen Hass entzündet.
As the Red Army approached, Goebbels' propaganda increasingly emphasized the atrocities committed in Nemmersdorf. An anonymous letter reveals the siege mentality that gripped citizens and their willingness to believe the regime's propaganda. I have such faith in our destiny that nothing can shake the confidence born of our long history and glorious past, as Dr. Goebbels says. It is impossible for things to turn out any other way. Perhaps we have reached a very low point at the moment, but we have determined men. The whole country is ready to march with arms in hand. We have secret weapons in reserve for the chosen moment, and, above all, we have a Führer whom we can follow with our eyes closed. Don't let them bring you down, for anything in the world. The Ardennes offensive, launched on the 16th of December 1944, breathed new life into Hitler's loyalists. The tide had finally turned. Their confidence in the Führer and in Wunderwaffen, miracle weapons such as the 5.2, blinded them to the harsh reality. Rumors began to circulate that the First US Army had been completely surrounded and that its members had been captured thanks to the use of an anesthetic gas. Paris was about to be recaptured, they told each other with fierce glee. They thought they could blackmail the world and take revenge for all that Germany had suffered. The German Army High Command, however, did not share this enthusiasm for the Western offensive. The General Staff officers feared that Hitler's strategic blow against the Americans in the Ardennes could weaken the Eastern Front at a decisive moment. The plan was, in any case, extremely ambitious. The final offensive against the Western Allies through the Ardennes forests in Belgium and northern Luxembourg was intended to break through the front, reach the Meuse River, and then push north to capture Antwerp, the main supply base of the Western Allies. Hitler was certain that the attack would divide the Allies and change the entire course of the war. However, his last trump card soon proved to be a bluff. The tenacity of the Americans in defensive warfare and the massive deployment of Allied air power, once the weather cleared, ended the momentum of the German attack within a week. On Christmas Eve, General Heinz Guderian, head of the Army's Supreme Command, arrived in his spacious official Mercedes at the highly secret military complex of Adlerhorst, the Führer's only headquarters in the West. His briefcase contained reports from General Reinhard Gehlen, director of the Eastern Front Information Department. Gehlen estimated that the Red Army would launch a massive attack from the Vistula River line around 12th January. According to his department's estimates, the enemy had an 11-to-1 superiority in infantry, 7-to-1 in tanks, 20-to-1 in artillery, and the same in aviation. Guderian, who had a temper comparable to Hitler's, entered the meeting room to come face to face with the Führer and his general staff. Among others present was Heinrich Himmler, the Reichsführer of the SS, who after the July conspiracy had also become commander of the reserve troops. Guderian, using findings from the intelligence department, described the Red Army's preparations for a major offensive in the east. He warned that the attack would take place within 3 weeks and requested that, since the Ardennes offensive had now been halted, as many divisions as possible be withdrawn for redeployment to the Vistula front. Hitler silenced him and dismissed such estimates of the enemy's strength as absurd. "Who is responsible for this string of nonsense?" the Führer shouted in a rage. Guderian resisted the temptation to reply that it was Hitler himself who was talking about German armies, when his own forces were the size of a single combat corps and infantry divisions had been reduced to battalion strength. Far from it, he merely defended Galen's figures. Horror-struck, he had to listen to General Jodl argue that the Western offensive should be maintained with more attacks. Since that was precisely what Hitler wanted, Guderian's plans were thwarted. Even more irritating for the general was having to listen to Himmler's opinion during dinner, as he boasted about his new position as military leader. He had recently been appointed commander of Army Group Upper Rhine, which was added to his other posts. "You know, dear general," he said to Guderian, "I am convinced that the Russians will not launch any attack. It's all just a tremendous bluff." Guderian had no choice but to return to the headquarters of the Oberkommando des Heers in Zossen. Meanwhile, losses in the west were mounting. The Ardennes offensive and auxiliary operations cost Germany 80,000 men. They also depleted a significant proportion of the country's dwindling fuel reserves. Hitler refused to accept that the Battle of the Ardennes had become the equivalent of the Kaiserschlacht, the last great German offensive of the First World War. He obsessively rejected any parallels that could be drawn with 1918. For him, 1918 symbolized only the revolutionary stab in the back that brought down the Kaiser and reduced Germany to humiliating defeat. "We will never surrender. We may succumb, but the whole world will go down with us," he declared vehemently. General Guderian, horrified by the new disaster looming on the Eastern Front, returned to the Führer's headquarters twice more in quick succession. During his visit on New Year's Day, Guderian encountered the annual procession of the regime's bigwigs and chiefs of staff to convey their wishes for a prosperous new year to the Führer in person. That same morning, Operation Northwind, the main complementary action to the Ardennes offensive, had been launched in Alsace. The day proved catastrophic for the Luftwaffe. Göring, in a characteristic gesture of utter irresponsibility, assigned nearly 1,000 aircraft to attack ground targets on the Western Front. This attempt to impress Hitler resulted in the virtual destruction of the Luftwaffe and gave the Allies complete air supremacy. The German radio broadcast Hitler's New Year's speech that day. In it, no mention was made of the fighting in the West, which is significant in that it highlights the failure of the offensive. And surprising as it may seem, there was hardly any mention of the Wunderwaffen.
Hier ist der Großdeutsche Rundfunk. Zur Jahreswende spricht der Führer aus seinem Hauptquartier zum deutschen Volk.
Deutsches Volk, Nationalsozialisten, Nationalsozialistinnen, meine Volksgenossen. Nur der Jahreswechsel veranlasst mich, heute zu Ihnen, meine deutschen Volksgenossen und Volksgenossinnen, zu sprechen. Die Zeit hat von mir mehr als Reden gefordert. Die Ereignisse der hinter uns liegenden 12 Monate, besonders aber der Vorgang des 20. Juli, haben mich gezwungen, meine ganze Aufmerksamkeit und Arbeitskraft der einzigen Aufgabe zu widmen, für die ich seit vielen Jahren lebe, dem Schicksalskampf meines Volkes.
Wir sind des Geiers schwarzer Haufen, Heia, oh.
This is the Mutual Broadcasting System.
That's the tale of a Europe in turmoil.
Upon this battle depends the survival of civilization.